On today's episode of Locked On Wild, could the Minnesota Wild have improved their picks in 2000, 2001, and 2002? Not really. We'll discuss on today's episode.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome in to another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, Isha Jahromi of the Sota Pod joins us as we continue our Drafts Revisited series, taking a look at the inaugural drafts, 2000, 2001, and 2002, with the goal to answer the question, could the Wild have done better with their selections? And short answer to today's show, not really. So we'll discuss here for the majority of the show today. Joined, as mentioned, by Isha Jahromi of the Sota Pod for our weekly crossover. And Isha, we are getting through the end of the month of May. June is right around the corner, and that means NHL Draft, and that means we start to get some things picking up steam. What's happening, man?
Not much, man. Best part of my week, as always. I've been loving going in the time machine, going back and checking out these drafts and doing these type of shows with you every week. And yeah, it's crazy that like summer is in full effect. Like the only reason I'm wearing a hoodie right now is because like my office is in this like dungeon style basement that it doesn't matter if it's December or August. It's still cold down here, but I emerged from the cave earlier to go to the Edina Kowalski's grand opening. And like, as soon as I walked outside, I was like, oh, this was a mistake, but I was already late. So I just sweated the whole time pretty much.
Like, we have entered the point of no return. We just got to go with it.
I swear these sweat marks on this hat are from today.
It happens.
But yeah, man, like Stanley Cup playoffs are in full effect. We're almost coming to the end of them, which is nuts. It just feels like it's flown by this year.
Yes, it definitely has. And you know, we continue to kind of take a peek back, and this is good for me too, because these drafts obviously predated my hockey.
You're watching baseball.
Yeah, I was still back in the Minnesota Twins days back then. And so it's a good opportunity to just kind of look back and see how things went. And no better place to go today than the first draft ever in Minnesota Wild franchise history, all the way back to 2000. And the Wild had the third overall pick in the first round that year. They take Marian the Barbarian, Marian Gaborik, who has most of the goal records for the Minnesota Wild from a long-term standpoint. The single season stuff, Kirill Kaprizov has passed him by, but still has many records with the Wilds in his tenure as kind of the focal point of the team for the middle part of the 2000s all the way to like, I don't remember the exact year that he left, but many Wild fans remember it vividly. He was with the Wilds until 2008, 2009, and then left for the New York Rangers after that. But a couple of 30-goal seasons, couple 40-goal seasons throughout his career. And Isha, I think we start by saying that this was definitively the right pick for the Minnesota Wild at third overall. Like, you look at some of the other guys, Danny Heatley, what a roller coaster career Heatley had, and he was taken number 2 overall,
which I think is deserved. And at that point, it's like you're taking Heatley or Gaborik, you're fine. Your franchise is fine, right? So like, yeah. I have no issue with the Wild not choosing him, but if they did, then like I'd I'd be fine with that too. He did end up on the Wild at one point, though.
Yeah, he circled his way back.
Way later.
Yeah, had just one of the weirdest. Heatley was one of the weirdest like heat check 50-goal season players in NHL history, probably.
He just had such a steep nosedive. Like when his decline was quick. It was like 2 years he wasn't the same, and then the Sharks were like, uh-oh. And like he had 2 good years with the Sharks, right? But even then it was like it wasn't 100-point seasons, right? 60 to 70 range, but he was nasty, man. He was nasty.
You look at the guys from a longevity standpoint and a production standpoint that would have been options. I mean, Columbus took Rostislav Klesla, definitely not pronouncing that right. Apologies, but played in 659 games, 159 total points. So that definitely was that would not have been the right route to go. Rafi Torres played in 600 plus.
Love Rafi Torres, but like he was not a
not a franchise
I guess guy. Yeah, but in 2000 the NHL was still like a rough league, and he mucked it up, right? And was a power forward, right? Yeah. And I guess just they didn't know he wasn't going to be able to produce at the rate he was at the lower ranks, right?
How about Scott Hartnell?
Love Scott Hartnell, man. That's a good pick. Out of all of them here, like Scott Hartnell, shoot, man, even like Justin Williams, Brooks Orpik. I mean, Brooks Orpik, Justin Williams, Stanley Cup champions. Now, Gaborik is too, unfortunately not with the Wild. But, I mean, those were, in hindsight, those are solid names. And like, people are going to roll their eyes. Brooks Orpik, dude. Brooks Orpik was a pillar for the Capitals, a pillar for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Now, am I suggesting that the Wild should have taken him over Gaborik? Absolutely not. But those are some of the names that really stand out to me. And then Justin Williams, man, Mr. Game 7, Stanley Cup to his name as well.
Yeah.
2, actually, if I'm not mistaken, with the Kings, right?
I am transfixed on the Hartnell statistics from year to year because he finished with 1,800 PIMs in his career and was the rare, like, dual threat 20-goal, 100 PIM guy.
Dude,
like,
you're so
good.
Good.
Every season. And 159 PIMs was his high point. Like, you do not want to mess with a dude like that. Like, no, he'll take you down for it. But it doesn't change. It doesn't change the overarching fact that the Wild definitely got this one right. And you look even to round 2. Nick Schultz was the pick for the Minnesota Wild. And, from a points perspective, not a guy that put up a ton of them.
But he wasn't meant to. He was a shutdown defenseman, and he was just that in the National Hockey League.
He was one of only 2 players in the second round to get to the 1,000 goal mark. Anton Vermette from the Ottawa Senators did that as well. But
there's actually quite a few guys who hit 1,000 games in this draft. Gaborik being one of them. And even though there were like some of his like head-to-head competitors for this next stat I'm going to present here, which is points, even though some of them had less games, he still leads that draft with points at 815 in his career in 1,035 games. I think like the closest second is what Hartnell and freaking Justin Williams, dude.
Yeah.
Both over 1,000 games as well.
So if you needed any more indication as to that being the correct pick, Gaborik was the right one. And Rick DiPietro, I mean, that's
now the thing is he probably could have been something, but that was a typical rushing a prospect and rushing a prospect in a position that you cannot rush them, right?
Correct.
And you know what? Like this could have happened with Fleury too. He was just an anomaly that came in so young, and Marc-Andre Fleury, that is when he was drafted first overall as well. Obviously not in this draft, but like I was worried about that one too. And then, Rick DiPietro had a good first few seasons and then signed that 15-year deal, dude, back when they could do that. And I mean, the fans turned on him when he didn't play to his contract.
Yikes. But thankfully the Wild not in that position to.
Thankfully, goalies just don't go first overall anymore.
Yeah. Could you, I mean,
how crazy was that? when like an 18-year-old goalie is taken first overall, when like goalies are especially in the National Hockey League, like it's such a mental game, and like you got guys' brains literally still developing, man. Like, you know, that are probably more influenced by like a bad string of losses when you're in a rebuilding team, you know, like you want goalies to have the utmost confidence. And honestly, that's what destroyed Rick DiPietro's career, was like losing that confidence in himself.
Some of the other picks throughout the 2000 drafts, not as many notable after round 1 and 2, which is why it's good that those two were so solid. Because, you know, round
Paul Martin,
4,
he was good in the second round. Elk River boy.
Oh yeah, there we go. So a couple of notable ones.
Mike Rupp,
Elk River guy, Paul Martin. So there are some notable, but Schultz the clear from a longevity standpoint.
Dude, there's so many Stanley Cup champions in this draft. Mike Rupp had one as well.
Insane.
Dominic Moore, also the Harvard product, he was in just at the end of the third round. He was a pretty good player as well.
Ilya Bryzgalov, second-round pick
legend.
for the Anaheim Ducks.
Absolute legend. Stanley Cup champion as well with the Anaheim Ducks, dude.
There we go.
The universe so humongous big. It's Tiger Low. Tiger Low. Dude, that was... God, when he... After his playing career, there was like a 2-year stint where he worked for the Player Tribune and actually went and did like video content with them, like interviewing players. Oh, it was amazing, dude. I adore Bryzgalov. I know Wild fans don't because he couldn't stop a beach ball when he was here, but still, he was so much fun as just a character in the league, especially after that like HBO series when the Flyers took on the Rangers at the Winter Classic.
I'm gonna have to go look that up now. Once we
have you not seen the Road to the Winter Classics?
I've seen bits and pieces, but not the entire thing.
Dude. Okay, yeah. The third season, don't even watch it. I think it was Toronto, Philly. It wasn't that good. Ooh. First 2 seasons, and I'm sure it's on Max or like we'll be able to find it for you. But the first season was Washington versus Pittsburgh with like a 25-year-old and a 24-year-old Ovi and Crosby, which was awesome. Jordan Staal was still with the Penguins at that time. And then the second season was Philly versus Rangers. The third was Toronto, and God, I don't even remember who was. That's how unmemorable that season was, other than Phil Kessel and Randy Carlyle going back and forth. He had some good sound bites in that one. But yeah, dude, the Philly and Rangers, like Sean Avery was on the Rangers. Philly had their whole cast of and crew there. It was wild, dude. And so for your audience as well, if you guys have not seen the Road to the Winter Classic HBO series, the first 2 seasons, that's homework for your audience, especially in the summer when you're just trying to digest as much hockey content as possible. Epic, dude. That's where Bruce Boudreau's swearing rants came from, because he was the coach of the Washington Capitals. Anyways, it was awesome, man. You can see me swoon about it. It was one of the best like hockey series, like behind just the game, that I've ever seen.
Tight. All right, that's on my list. It's on my list of watchables this summer. From a Wild standpoint, the rest of 2000, maybe the most notable pick after round 2 was Lubomir Sekharas. Got into 213 games. Yep. I had to get that in for Hoppy.
It's solid, and he actually was really good while he was here, and he was really good after as well when he went back to. Well, he played everywhere. So you came up in the Czech League, then went played in Sweden, Russia, Germany, Switzerland, Slovakia, back to the Czech League. I don't even know what the SCL is, but he played there too, and then played in the Slovak League again before retiring in 2011.
Unreal. World traveler, like frequent flyer miles for Sekharas. So yeah, overall arcing theme is that the Wild definitely hit
on their first round, for sure.
Their first couple of picks in their inaugural draft, which you need as a starting franchise. You got to make those picks count. So
yeah, what is it? 3 out of 10 were actually like played over 100 games. 2 of them 1,000. Mind you, not 10. Necessarily with the Wild, but you know,
a good majority of those games with the Wild. So I'll call those successes. Now, 2001 is one that certainly has a lot of opinions about it, and so we'll talk about the 2001 draft and see if the Wild got it right or if they could have gone in any other direction. That is coming up as we continue today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by Game Time. Ladies and gentlemen, the NBA Finals are right around the corner. The Minnesota Timberwolves hoping that they can be one of the teams in the final series of the NBA season. If they get there, you have an opportunity to go. Yes, how cool would it be to go to an NBA Finals game at Target Center? Game Time can help make that a reality. Game Time makes getting NBA Finals tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off. And with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and Game Time's lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. So take the guesswork out of buying NBA Finals tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. For the everydayers, as I mentioned yesterday, we have some exciting new things coming up for you starting on June 8th. So stay tuned as a little bit of additional content coming your way from Locked on Wild. We're calling it Locked on Wild 2.0. So stay tuned as I continue to iron out the details of that. But also make sure to check out the Sota Pod with a full lineup of content themselves. Fellowship of the Rinks, Judd's Buds, and episodes throughout the week as well, including my weekly appearance. You can find all that wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Which, by the way,
Seth, the Sota Pod. Yes,
next week we got a juicy episode to get into.
Ooh.
A lot of off-ice stuff is going down in the world of hockey, and yeah, we're gonna talk about it because some of it's not easy to digest, but I want to discuss it with you. We might even bring on an additional guest,
sure,
to break down some of that stuff too. So there's a tease, ladies and gentlemen.
You heard it here first. Love that. Love that. Let's take a look at 2001. 2001's draft, the Minnesota Wild selected 6th overall, and they took Mikko Koivu, who ended up becoming the captain, long-standing captain for the Minnesota Wild, and played all but the final weird cup of tea with the Columbus Blue Jackets for the Minnesota Wild. All told, 1,000-plus games, 711 points, one of the just an elite defensive center for the Minnesota Wild. But looking at the rest of the draft, Isha, this is interesting because you look at some of the other guys that had lengthy and productive careers. There weren't a ton behind Koivu that the Minnesota Wild could have selected.
No, there were just names. There were just names in the later part of the draft. Like unlike 2001 had a lot of late picks pop, right? In regards to the first round, I've actually deemed the 2001 draft the Buffalo draft because I feel like they hit with Roy and Pominville in the second round, which is huge because they both ended up being on the same line, right? And were the top line of the Buffalo Sabres for a little while. I have no issue with the Koivu pick at all, especially if you look at the first round. I'm not going to be like, oh, well, you didn't pick Patrick Sharp, right? Well, like he fell for a reason. No one thought he was going to be, who he was. But as far as the first round went, I mean, it's funny that there's a lot more elite talent, in my opinion, later in this draft. Like Dan Hamhuis would have been a really good pick, but again, he was a defenseman who I still think Mikko Koivu overall was probably the better player.
Yeah.
Ales Hemsky, I love Ales Hemsky, by the way, man. The thing about Ales Hemsky that sucks is he played for a very mediocre Edmonton Oilers team. Now, he did go to the finals with them one year, or the Western Conference, when they had that series against Dallas, and then Dallas missed the empty net. Hemsky gets the takeaway, scores it, sends it to overtime, but they did lose that one. Hemsky is one of those like cult following type of players, Seth. Like, I don't even want to say like hardcores, but like the nerds around that time, like they know how unbelievably slick his hands were. He was just a Band-Aid at the end of the day, and he played for a lot of bad Oilers teams. Yeah. But like even my roommate doesn't watch as much NHL as we do today, definitely watched more when we were younger. Dude, I brought up Alex Hemsky, and he was like, "Oh my god, Alex Hemsky was so good. He's one of my favorite players." And I was like, "You're not an Edmonton fan?" He's like, "No, I'm a Hemsky fan, dude." And no joke said, like, I have some Vancouver friends back home who have his jersey because like he's just that. He was, and Vancouver Canucks fans aren't Edmonton Oilers fans, right? You'll never see me buying a McDavid jersey, but I'd buy a Hemsky jersey. He was awesome.
And it comes down to what the Wild were looking for. And this is something that I'm going to try to see if I can't dive into. I don't know where to look per se, but like draft strategy for the Minnesota Wild. Obviously, they take Koivu with designs of him being a top 6 center, which he was. But like, it just would be fun to kind of get into the mentality of like, okay, what are we looking for throughout these few drafts? So if I can find the info to do that, I am going to this summer.
I think you're going to have to produce that info. You're going to have to do a deep dive. I do know that, especially like 4th round on in the early days, they leaned heavily on the Minnesota guys.
Sure.
Even like Minnesota guys, like guys from Minnesota who were playing in the dub, college, whatever. There is a trend that in later they went with the Minnesota guy when they thought like, everything's even here, let's just go with him. And sometimes it worked out, but for the most part,
like 2nd round in 2001, Kyle Wanvig played in 75 career games.
And look who was a few picks above him was Derek Roy. They missed out on that one. Yeah. And right after, so the 2nd round, we can be a little bit more critical because there's actually some really good talent inside. Like Mike Camilleri, bro. Like, oh my God, Mike Camilleri was so good. He was picked quite a bit later as well. I know Chris Thorburn didn't put up a lot of points, but he was a solid like power forward who played like for 800 games. And he was picked right after Camilleri there. Like I said, Jason Pominville, man, so good. Played over 1,000 games.
Yeah.
A deep cut, Jay McClement. I had no idea he played 900 games. That's crazy.
Jeez. And you talked about Patrick Sharp. Like that's in the 3rd round. I mean, Stefan Veilleux played 500 plus games, but
Veilleux was fine.
Yeah. It's just 2 picks later, Patrick Sharp. That would have fit in quite nicely with what Minnesota Wild was doing. Montreal
was lucky to get Plekanec because I know there's some team like he wasn't going to go early, but like there was still buzz around him. He was just small, right? He was a small Czech guy, but he had such a good career as well.
The rest of the picks, in the 4th round, Tony Verda, 8 games. That was,
dude, they should have went with Tutu.
Yeah, that was.
I love Jordan Tutu, man.
It's not great. Christian
Ehrhoff, man, that was another good one.
Jeez, 1,000 PIMs in 723 games.
Dude, Jordan Tutu is one of my, I don't want to say favorite players, but one of the guys who I rooted for a lot as a kid who like wasn't on like the Canucks or like the Capitals, the 2 teams that I followed the most back then.
Notable
he's from Northern Canada too. He's from the territories, right? So he is like indigenous to the core. Would go back up there. Would take a lot of his teammates like ice fishing and like straight up like build igloos with them. Like just showed them like the real Northern Canadian indigenous lifestyle. And apparently his dad was just a riot. All the guys on the team were like, "Oh, we love just hanging out with Tutu Senior because." And like they'd go whale hunting. It was wild, dude. Yeah, like harpoon and all. Like a lot of the players that Tutu would bring up in like the summers or in like the winter breaks, like they loved it. It was like screw Cancun. We're gonna go freaking whale hunting with Jordan Tutu up north and hang out with his dad. He had battled with addiction and alcoholism as well, and was able to overcome that and still play in the National Hockey League. And his story is really cool because he came from literally like a village up north where like they straight up, I don't think he lived in an igloo, but they had igloos for when they were hunting, fishing, whatever, storage of meat and things like that. And then he said when he was drafted and played his junior hockey in Brandon, Manitoba. Now, Brandon to people from the Twin Cities, that's a small town, right? But to him, he said like, it honestly, like, it was really hard for him because he was from a small village, very tight community, knew everyone, like just not like probably less than like 100 people, right? To like a city where he's like never been in like a downtown metropolis, even as small as like Brandon, Manitoba. And so he said like it was just super hard as like a kid to like go from being, very much living off the land playing hockey to going and playing in major junior.
The big notable one from a fan favorite perspective was in the 7th round in 01. So you got Koivu in the 1st round. After that, not a ton of success, but Derek Boogaard in the 7th. Like
legend,
universally a fan favorite because he was one of those guys that would just not take anything from anybody. Like, imagine racking up 245 penalty minutes in a 61 game season for Prince George. Like,
well, and how cool was it that like Hamuse was also drafted that year and they were on the same team in PG?
Yeah, just a
was
bruiser
also on their team, by the way.
There's a reason that he got the Boogeyman nickname, because if you did something, if you ran afoul of him on the ice and he was out there, like, head on a swivel.
Dude, all it took was to put him over the boards and just skate by the opponent's bench. And the coach would do that. He would do that. If something dirty happened and the ref didn't call it, in commercial break, Seth, he would send Boogaard out there to do a lap. And that was enough at times. That's how scary this guy was. Oh my! Absolute legend, man. Like, it was such a tragedy. I was telling you before we went live here. I'll always remember like where I was when I heard the news. I was at like some dingy little dive bar shooting pool in Edmonton. And it came up on the screen like breaking news, Derek Boogaard passed. I grew up watching this guy. I grew up in Prince George, ladies and gentlemen. Like, the Cougars were my NHL team as a kid, and I got to watch Boogaard from 16, basically like he played I think he got traded from the Regina Pats to Prince George and played 3 years there before unfortunately going to Medicine Hat. I hate Medicine Hat, but that's okay. It's more of a dump than Prince George too. Anyway, sorry.
We miss you, Boogie.
No, legend, rest in peace, the Boogie man.
But that, again, I think we come to the overall consensus that at least in the 1st round, if the Wild were looking for a center at that point, I mean,
they got one.
Yeah, and you got to go all the way down to like pick 20, and you're just not going to do that.
Well, they got a center, which he became their top center, but they got a top center, we'll say. He didn't end up being a top center, but definitely projected to be one. And one of the most feared enforcers in that era.
Yep.
And only 7 picks, right? So I would say, only 7 picks. So I would say that they hit on 2, because they didn't expect Boogaard to do anything but what he did, right? Yeah. And, Veilleux was serviceable. So 3 guys who actually played for a while in the league. And Veilleux, when he came back from Europe, played with the Wild and was it Houston was their farm team at the time before Iowa?
Yes, I believe that's correct.
The Arrows or something like that. I guess I have DB up. I can just look. Houston Arrows. Yes, sir. That was weird, when the Wild had Houston as their farm team.
Glad it's Iowa now.
Dude, Vancouver had Utica, New York until 2 years ago. Dude, no, they literally had to, like, when players went down, they had to bring up guys sometimes from like Canadian university hockey because they couldn't get guys to Vancouver in time. Jeez. The dumbest thing ever, dude. Now, Utica's a
no
great little hockey market, and I'm pretty sure they're the Devils farm team now. The town loves their hockey, but it just made no sense, like, for the Canucks. Shoot, even Brandon, Manitoba, or was it? Yeah, the Mooseheads. They played, I believe they played in Brandon, or they might have been in Winnipeg, I forget. But anyways, the Manitoba Mooseheads, like, that still, in my opinion, was a little too far. Finally, now they have them in Abbotsford, which is like an hour north, which thank goodness.
Yeah, much more serviceable at this point. Let's finish by looking at 01, because 01 is kind of an interesting one to dive into as well. So we'll finish taking a look at the Pierre-Marc Bouchard selection, 8th overall, as we finish our Drafts Revisited edition of Locked On Wilds after this. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Seth Topal hanging out with Isha Jahromi of the Sota Pod. Isha, 2001. The Minnesota Wild had the 8th overall pick in the first round. They go Pierre-Marc Bouchard with this selection, and all told, 593 games, 110 goals. You look at what was available or what was taken, immediately after. There are a couple of interesting names, including, and he ended up playing for the Wild eventually, Keith Ballard. I didn't realize that he was taken in that exact same draft as Bouchard, but that was certainly an interesting one. Who kind of
Alex Semin, man.
Yeah, that's the big one.
I don't know if he would have worked out anywhere else in Washington, because they had so many Russians there, and Ovi was there, and he was very much like, I'm not going to adapt to North America like I am a Russian. Dude, if that guy had a little bit more work ethic back then, he could have been one of the best players in the league. No joke. His hands were better than anybody. He was the most talented player in the National Hockey League for a couple of years. And it didn't reflect on paper because he would go on these streaks. But dude, like, his dangles, like, to this day, like, it's hard to even, like, have a comparison. That's how good he was. Like, it was so slick, but he was kind of a string bean. He didn't play hard. You know what I mean? Like, there wasn't the dog in him, right? Yeah. He didn't have that edge to him. He was a very, very finesse player, which kind of worked with that Capitals group at the time. But yeah, he kind of fell off as well. But I mean, proof's in the pudding for the 500-ish games that he played in the National Hockey League, or 600, 239 goals, 517 points. Like, he was nasty. In
the second round,
Alexander Steen too, 1,000 games, 622 points. And sorry, by the way, the only reason why I puked at the sound of Keith Ballard was when he came over to the Canucks, he was. See, I'm already getting triggered. The reason Chris Tanev is a National Hockey League player is because Keith Ballard sucked so much with the Canucks, and they paid him way too much money.
Yikes.
I know he's a Minnesota boy, Gophers guy, whatever, dude. As a Canucks fan back then, he screwed us. He was so bad, but Chris Tanev got a career because of him. So there you go.
Sometimes things work out in the end.
They had to call up an undrafted guy to take the $4.5 million player's spot in the playoff, Seth. It was at least Ehrhoff worked out for the Canucks. But anyways, Minnesota podcast. Yeah. Sorry.
I would say so. Couple of other options that probably would have turned out better than PMB, but this is the beauty of being able to kind of look back and do this, because at the time, the Wild thought they were getting a solid pick in Bouchard, and look, he was a solid player. Yeah, just life is good. It could be better.
He's better than Stonehands Chris Higgins, who played 711 games with only 333 points. Dude, Chris Higgins was such a fun player to watch, but his hands were stone, bro. He had no dangles.
Yeah, just some players aren't blessed with the skills that everyone else is. The second round pick, Josh Harding, and Harding had, in the wins department, not a ton of wins, but he had some good peripheral numbers for the Wild throughout his career.
Yep.
But the one that really jumps out at me here in the second round is Duncan Keith.
Oh.
It feels like sacrilege to say what it would have been like to have Duncan Keith, but geez, I mean, he played just a ton of games from 05-06 to his final like full season in 2021-2022. Like
Yep.
he was just a reliable, dependable defenseman, and getting that in the second round would have been very, very solid. I mean, Matthew Stajan is another potential name. Trevor Daley.
Yuri Hudler was an awesome player as well, man. I really liked watching him, especially as like an older guy coming over to the Calgary Flames when like Gaudreau and Monahan were like, Tkachuk wasn't even on the team yet, but he played on a line with Gaudreau and Monahan when they were like in their first and second season. And, you know, he was kind of the old man on the team, but they kind of rejuvenated him a bit. And he was like the Zuccarello of that line, which was awesome. And there's one story where he just got like on one of the planes and just walked out into the airport with no shoes on. He's like, oh, geez, I lost my shoes. I just keeps walking like, oh, he was fun. He was fun. But even like, yeah, Fleischmann, Boychuk. At the end of the second round, there's actually some solid guys here. Yeah,
there are some nice names. There are some nice names that carved out nice long careers at the NHL level.
I know Josh Harding, you know, decent goalie, you know, and we overlooked this in the first. Both of us missed this. Who's the Stanley Cup goaltender that we missed in the first? Cam Ward, baby.
Oh,
25th overall. Won as a rookie. The Stanley Cup as a rookie, man, alongside Eric Stahl.
Yeah, that would have done nicely.
Yeah, he was incredible.
Yeah, so we're gonna put 2001 in the could have upgraded category. Looking back, and you know, other selections, the third round picks just did not work out at all. Mike Erickson and Barry Brust, back to back too. And see what I'm saying here? 72nd overall, they went with the Minnesota guy. Yeah. Yeah, it certainly is a pattern that we have seen continue throughout their history. Fifth round pick.
Filppula was in this draft. Dude, Filppula was a fun player to watch as well. I'm pretty sure he ended his career with Tampa, but he was fun to watch as well. Yeah, 1,000 games for him. And you are correct. He played with Tampa Bay. He played with Philly, played with the Islanders, Detroit. Bookended his career starting in Detroit and ending in Detroit before playing in the Swiss League. And he was really good, man.
He is still, or at least was last year, playing in the Swiss League. Yeah, last year. He had 11 goals in 51 games.
2002. Oh, my goodness. I was always a fan of Filppula, man. 40 years of age, 33 points in 51 games. Let's go. Dude, last year was over point per game. Are you kidding me? That's crazy.
For a 40-year-old, not bad.
Dude, and he played in the National Hockey League since until 2021. I had no idea he was this active like late in his career. Because I kind of thought, like, I know he went to Philly, but I didn't think he went anywhere else after that. I totally forgot he went to the Islanders, and Detroit was just bad in 19 and 20, so like I didn't even really care. But wow. See, this I love. Dude, you can see me like nerding out and swooning right now. I love this. This is so cool.
This is why we're doing this. Other picks throughout did not really pop, and I just find it funny. Wild had 2 9th round selections. Neither of them got to the NHL level, but Mr. Irrelevant, the 291st selection in the draft, Jonathan Eriksson, defenseman out of Sweden, played 680 games as the last pick. The last pick in the draft. He played 680 games, many more than anybody else on the list. He beat out 680. Let's see how many first round picks he beat. Well, he beat out Pierre-Marc Bouchard for games. He beat out a bunch.
2 other notable picks in the 8th round: Max Talbot, Stanley Cup champion. He 704 games, 204 points. Dennis Wideman, really, really good defenseman. 815 games, 387 points. Now, Wideman was a little bit more on the offensive side, but I wouldn't say he's an offensive defenseman. I would say he was just a solid two-way guy. But some nights, the thing about Wideman was some nights he would kind of take off defense. Some nights he would take off offense. And then you'd see, like, for the most part, he kind of put it together. He was also infamous for attacking a referee. And I believe was not only fined, but like criminally charged for it when he's playing with the Calgary Flames. And I think that was in his final year. Don't quote me on that, but because he did have a final run with the Calgary Flames. Man, I remember when Dennis Wideman was on the Washington Capitals, like their defense was like, what did they have? They had like Mike Green, Dennis Wideman, Carl Alsner, and a young John Carlson. It was nasty, man, on the back end.
Jeez.
And like Mike Green was putting up like 80 points, dude. It was crazy.
I would love that.
And Carlson and Alsner were like the third pairing young guys. And Alsner more stay at home. Obviously, Carlson moved the puck. Like, yeah, the Capitals had so many opportunities to win the cup before 17, but the Rangers in Pittsburgh just like just put out that fire for them. Just pissed all over it. Year after year after year.
Well, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. But I'm willing to say that 2001 could definitely have been upgraded. And
2002.
2002, thank you. 2000, 2001, both Wild did well with their picks.
I think 2000, if we're going to rank them in order, 2000, 2001, 2002.
Yep. I think chronological order wins out here. So that's what we got for you for today's episode. Isha, let the listeners know where they can find you.
You can find me on X at VI Sports Talk, but you don't want to follow me. I just share fight knockouts and random hockey stuff. Follow at Sota Pod on X, and it's at the Sota Pod everywhere else. Check out our YouTube channel, the Sota Pod, daily videos, weekly live streams, and I'm posting my Kowalski vlog there later tonight too. So if you want to see that, it's fun. It's fun.
There we go. Listeners, thanks for tuning in. As always, have a great weekend. We will have you covered with a fun Monday episode coming up at Lockdown Wild. So make sure that you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. We got new ones for you every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.